Hello, I'm Phil Cantor. I'm the CMO of IGTB. Welcome to the liquidity management webinar called Gain and Retain. Learn from real case studies how to win, or in some cases, how to lose marquee clients. I'm very pleased you're all with us. So, I need to make the slide move. Let's move on to the first slide, please. I'll just say a little bit about who we are. I'm sure you all know us, but if there's anybody out there who isn't familiar, Intellect Global Transaction Banking is the transaction banking division of Intellect. And we have 86 now customers worldwide, all in transaction banking, many in liquidity. We'll say a little bit more about that later. But we cover everything from cash to liquidity management, to virtual accounts, to payments. We process all the payments for large international banks. Also trade finance and supply chain finance, cash flow forecasting, and it's all front to back. We get recognized. I won't go through all of these, but just to let you know that Accenture pulled us out as having, as the only one they mentioned for PAAS, and Solent similarly classified us as the only one as a pace setter. But you can see all of that on our website. Let's get to the liquidity. Let's get to the meat in the sandwich. So, as I said, I'm the CMO of IGTB. I've got 15 years corporate banking experience going back to 1985, followed by 20 years experience in software suppliers. Since 2013, I've run marketing for Intellect Global Transaction Banking. But I'm going to be joined with some real liquidity experts. I'm going to be joined, first of all, by Joshua Cohen. So Joshua, please do come and join me.
Phil.
Hi there,
Phil.
Josh.
Thank you very much for having us on.
That's fine. So many of you I know will know Joshua. He's quite a well-known speaker. He's been chair of the working group for BAFT. He spent many years in Standard Chartered working with clients, helping them with their liquidity. In particular, he's now the head of liquidity for Intellect Global Transaction Banking, IGTB. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm also joined by Ravi Chandran Sankaran, sorry. Ravi has 22 years experience in all forms of transaction banking and helping banks all around the world. He has the distinction of having architected and delivered the first integrated transaction banking system in the world. And he particularly loves creating innovative solutions for banks. Ravi, please come and join us.
Hi, Phil. Hi, Ravi. On the show.
Hi, Josh. How's it going?
Good. So we're very pleased to take questions, but the way I'd like to run this is we'll run through the presentation. There's not a huge number of slides, you'll be glad to know. But you can type in your questions at any time. Just hit this Q&A button and you'll get a little pop-up, or you should get a little pop-up that says Q&A, and you can type your question here. One of my colleagues will collect those together, and then Ravi will go through the ones at the end that we have time for. So that would be delighted to take that. So without further ado, I'd like to kick off the webinar, and I'm going to hand over to Josh to start us off.
Thanks very much, Phil. And I guess I'm sort of acting a bit as a compere here, but also as an expert witness as things
Who's on trial?
I hope not on trial, but I hope the opportunity to extol some of our capabilities. One of the things that we show clients occasionally is a slide that's probably just popped up on your screen. It's something that came up in the Financial Times about 8 months ago, where they were looking at what had traditionally been considered a boring business, transaction banking. And these three clients, Citibank, JP Morgan Chase, and HSBC, were all improving revenue by double digits, percentage-wise, over the last 12 months. And this was coming from transaction banking, from principally cash management, and of course liquidity management being a key part of that. And what's sort of interesting to us is that two of these clients actually take the liquidity management software from Intellect. So we wanted to dig a little bit further into this to try and understand why transaction banking and cash management in particular has become so key to these banks' revenue structures, whereas previously it had been a bit of a backwater and playing second fiddle very much to financial markets and corporate finance.
I remember at BAFTA a few years ago, one of the presenters mentioned that transaction banking is 8 times the M&A size for banks, and yet it gets hardly any attention. Now it's getting some attention. But I mean, you can see the Financial Times talk about it as the fastest growing part of banking at 9%. Here are some banks getting 21%, 16% growth.
Yeah. And we hear similar stories across Europe as well. I mean, these are global banks, but regionally in Europe, we hear the same sort of thing.
I think in the last 12 to 18 months, we've seen an explosion of need for liquidity rejuvenation of liquidity platform itself. The demand for liquidity solutions has been its strongest in the last decade, I would say.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. Liquidity, for some reason, has really kicked off, and we're going to sort of delve into what those reasons are that's driving this. So the two themes about this particular webinar is firstly, we want to talk about relationships, and secondly, we want to talk about product, because it's that combination of relationships and product that means that you win or potentially lose a cash management mandate. And this will come up throughout this conversation that we're going to have. And the focus here is going to be on marquee clients. That was the title of the webinar. It's about marquee clients. These are your biggest, best, most productive clients with respect to revenue.
So this is the top end, not the SME.
That's correct. Yeah.
I mean, we have solutions and things to say about SME as well, but not on this webinar.
Yeah, exactly. And we're really sort of going to dig around and try and understand, with using a few examples, and one's just come up on the screen now, using a few examples as to what learnings we can take away perhaps from these case studies. So the first one here is a case study out in the Far East, out in Asia. Lianfeng is a very large corporate manufacturer, and this company passed its cash management mandate over to HSBC, and I think, Phil, you actually highlighted this one to me previously, and I think you've read about it.
Yeah, this is very interesting. I mean, this is in the public domain, so it was published in TMI. You can look it up yourself. There's quite a lot of wording there. I think the story comes down to something very simple. They were quite happily banking with another bank as the main bank. HSBC was a bank to them, but a transactional bank. They didn't make a lot of money from them, and one would assume from that statement. But then the Lianfeng grew and grew, and they got to a point where they ran an RFP, and HSBC won that through a clever combination of running 2 notional pools primarily. But there were some other things in there as well, and if you read the case study, you can get a bit more of the background. The standout fact for me is, for the bank, they went to being principal bank. So that was a gain. Of course, for the incumbent bank, it was a fail to retain. The salient numbers to remember are they closed 300 bank accounts. That alone saved them $1.5 million per annum. They also invested surplus funds that they couldn't do before, that were trapped in different accounts. That earned them another $0.75 million in interest received. And then they avoided $500,000 of overdraft and paying interest to banks. So the net result was it saved the corporation close on $3 million per annum, which is significant in anybody's book. Plus the bank won. And it all came down really to having the right, as Josh, you said, the right relationship backed up with a stellar product.
And probably the obverse side or reverse side of that coin is the incumbent bank clearly had the relationship, but didn't have the product line.
presumably not.
And you know, it's that playoff between the two that we'll see in each of these case studies: relationship and product capability.
I think the balance of scale is going down on the relationship more on the product side. So where there's more of a product capability, corporates are willing to move to banks that provide them the sort.
And we will see that on a third case study, which is exactly a case study of a very long-standing relationship that
couldn't save.
was unable to save or maintain that cash management mandate in its fullest.
But you're telling them the plot.
I am. So let's move on. The second case.
I like the way it looks like it's an Earl Stanley Gardner, Perry Mason, the case of this and the case of that, by the way.
Actually, this was a little intriguing because this was a very large oil company, oil corporate. They had a lot of joint ventures in the region, multiple joint ventures, in fact. And their unique problem was managing liquidity across these joint ventures. Some of them were rich in cash, some of them were cash poor. How do you manage liquidity, especially in a volatile oil scenario, oil price being volatile now? So this corporate was trying to use their existing TMS solution, in-house TMS solution, to figure this out. Our customer, the bank in question here, figured out there's an opportunity for them to upsell a product into the corporate and cement the relationship a little better. So we, along with the bank.
Well, it wasn't just cement the relationship. There was a real risk that corporate could have walked.
Absolutely, because it's a slippery slope. Once they're on it, you don't know where it stops. So, so we sort of helped the bank sort of pitch this product to the corporate, which is intercompany loan in this case, and showed that it was a superior solution to their existing treasury management system that they had in-house. It was real time. They could do intraday, and they could also have comprehensive limit control as well as real-time fund check, all baked into the solution. So it was a win-win for the corporate, it was a win-win for the bank, and it was extension of our product suite as well.
So the thing about intercompany loans is you're not going to get that from your DDA.
That's
yeah.
right.
And the sophistication of this intercompany loan, and how many major multinationals, marquee clients have joint ventures a lot, is you need quite a sophisticated ICL solution in order to be able to do this, and not many people have that. And
absolutely. And this
message.
particular ICL solution can be used worldwide, across jurisdiction, with all regulations already baked into the product. So it was
even in China.
Even in China, interest loans in China is something that we developed and deliver out. So yes.
Yeah, and it is sort of driven by a very real need for multi-bank capability, real-time management of the ledgers, and ensuring that you can look after your joint ventures, your subsidiaries, as well as just bank accounts, which is what normally it's.
And because it's intraday and real-time, the corporates get real-time visibility of the cash positions.
Yeah, right? Yeah. So there we have something where we had that combination of, I've got a great relationship, my product needs a little bit of improvement. So if I can react accordingly, appropriately towards the client need, then I can upscale my product to be able to retain the client. And this is a great example there.
Absolutely.
And it's something that we were actually involved with, so which is a nice one to be able to talk
Well, the relationship with the vendor was important as well.
Yes.
Just to blow our own trumpet for a moment.
Well, if you like. So the next one, if we're going to go through this sort of story of gain, retain, and then I suppose fail to retain, is a story that comes out from a large car manufacturer that had a multi-year relationship with its bank. And in this particular instance, the bank was looking for more capability to be delivered by, the corporate was looking for more capability to be delivered by the bank. And unfortunately, the bank was not able to respond fast enough with the right product line to retain that client. And in the end, the client took some of its portfolio business to another bank. So it demonstrates how important the product line is, despite the fact that this multi-year relationship has been ongoing. And both of these are household names, both the bank and the corporate. And it's, I think, Phil, you described this when I explained the situation on this particular story to you. You said, well, that's a bit embarrassing.
Mm.
And I think that's probably right.
It's more than embarrassing, actually. But I think genesis of the problem is banks are looking at liquidity management solution more as a defensive solution, as a defensive product. But this is a classic case of bank not being ready with the right product when the customer wanted. Nobody's going to wait for 2 years, 3 years for the bank to roll out the right product. And some of these solutions take time to build out.
Of course.
Unless the banks anticipate the change and the speed of change and the velocity of what needs to be done, they will not be ready.
That's a really good point. So if you look at the first example, where there was another bank ready to step in with the right product, they were able to snatch. If you look at the second example, the bank was able to act quickly enough. There was still a lead time, but the promise that something was being done and the evidence of that was enough to retain the client. And in this instance, clearly that didn't happen.
Absolutely. So relationships not just not completely sufficient.
No,
it's necessary, but it's not sufficient.
And indeed, I mean, it is necessary. There was something that I read in a survey done in 2015, as it happens. It's quite an old survey, but it's one that we'll reference again, the 2019 survey, in a moment. But the 2015 one had a quote from an American bank, and the American bank said, "We don't do cold pitches." So if you don't have the relationship, it's very difficult to get in there, even if you do have the product. But if you don't have the product, despite a good relationship, you stand at high risk of losing those market clients.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it reminds me of when I was at Barclays, David Weymouth was the head of corporate banking at the time. And he said, people only ask for a relationship manager when it doesn't work. I don't think that's entirely true. I think the good relationship managers help the business, but it's more than that.
Yeah. So I've referenced a moment ago, this is Euromoney, and this is thanks to our friends Cameron and Mark Lilly at Euromoney. So thank you guys for providing this data to us. But we've got other data to dig into, and I'll cover some of that in a moment. But what this is talking about is the large multinational corporates. So this particular survey was questioning multinational corporates about what they were going to do. And more than half of them said that they, and I'm reading it from the screen here, the number of their providers will increase. So they have a number of cash management providers. And this is a theme that goes across surveys, I would say as well. The number of cash management providers that they have, they anticipate increasing those. And I guess that's really because they need specialist capabilities, specialist product capabilities in different geographies to meet the regulatory requirements and the market practice.
And M&A, don't forget.
Yes,
I mean, Liam Fund grew through M&A, and it was because of that largely that they had such difficulty in getting a solution.
So what you're talking about there is if you are the incumbent provider to a large local corporate, and then it gets taken over by a large multinational.
It happens all the time.
And as you're absolutely right, you say it happens all the time. Then of course, as the incumbent to the local corporate, you then are at risk.
You're the default.
Unless you have capabilities that are broader than your local geography.
Well, suddenly the relationship is not with the buying entity.
Yeah.
Correct. Yes. That's a very good point.
Pretty much overnight, the game moves on. So if banks are not ready with it, then they're going to face the problem.
Yeah, and so going on to a couple of other surveys, and I will cite these as well. PwC have got a survey out, the Global Treasury, and I'm reading from a piece of paper, so excuse me for doing this, Global Treasury Transaction Banking Survey. And they say the value per transaction banking client of these corporates, on average, is $1.4 million. That's the revenue that these large corporates provide on transaction banking alone. So you can understand the value of retaining these clients. If you've got one, for goodness sakes, don't lose it for want of spending money on product capability, because that's $1.4 million of revenue walking out the door to a competitor. That I found very interesting. And then also in the same survey, 66% of large corporates, sorry, again, I'm reading from the paper here, 66% of large corporates are looking at their banking relationships on at least a yearly basis. So every year, 2/3 of those large corporates are reevaluating their relationships with their banks. So I guess in terms of plugging product capability, this is about, you know,
Well,
don't get caught out.
It's happening more and more. And I'm sorry, another quick story from my past. Jeremy Wilson brought me in the 90s to meet all his top relationship managers for big corporates, because tenders were just coming in and RFPs. Before that, the main sales process, he used to joke, was lunch and golf club. And they had to learn how to respond to a tender, but now it's absolutely routine and it's only getting more and more competitive, I think.
The numbers are compelling.
Yeah, yeah. So what do you do about this? I mean, this is sort of a very simplistic model that how we look at the sort of sophistication and increasing sophistication as you move up the triangle on the left, where the base is at the top. So you're trying to meet those marquee client capabilities. So down at the bottom where you have SMEs and mid-caps, zero balance, target balance, follow the sun sweeping, end of day is very standard. As you move into the marquee clients, they expect much more complex user journeys to be able to deliver on their needs within their treasury areas.
I think it's worth noting that while we are focusing on the complex corporates, the very large corporates, a lot of mid-caps and smaller corporates have a chance of growing and becoming actually a large corporate, either through like through an acquisition or because of exponential growth. Look at all the fintechs that have grown in the last 10 years. So,
well, and the increased better capital management
absolutely
engendered by their bank.
Absolutely.
We hope.
So when they move tiers from becoming from a mid-tier to large corporate, their needs change. They require more sophisticated products. And how does the bank ensure that they continue to service even those customers? I think that's what I read.
And I guess really the bank's business model is to determine, well, where do they want to be in this? Do they want to be able to cope with the largest corporates, in which case they need to ensure product capability? Are they happy in a more regional role where perhaps they don't need quite such wide capability? But what I'm also seeing is SMEs looking into the mid-caps and seeing capabilities that they think, you know, I could use that.
Well,
I could.
Revenue size of a corporate is not necessarily a correct gauge of their sophistication.
That's true.
And needs.
Because trade is now increasingly east-west. So
and east-south.
East-south. So corporates are having to go beyond their usual sphere of operation to meet demand and to reduce operational
even
costs.
in the US.
Even in the US. So it's going to be increasingly that the same product suite is required by a larger segment of customers, but maybe offered slightly differently and more innovative.
Yeah, yeah. So and you know, we concentrate on that top bit. You know, we sort of feel that as a product provider, we've got the bottom part of that triangle on the left.
I think we've got all of it.
But we keep pushing the barrier up on the top on the top side every time some new ideas come in.
Well, I mean, the great thing is because we've got so many clients, we find what are the new structures, the new little tweaks that are important to put into structures. That if one bank's doing that, then obviously by the time it comes into our product, it becomes available for other banks.
Yes, yes, quite right. And it's our job to ensure that it's all appropriate as well for market. The slide that we're just throwing up very quickly are some of the credentials that we have, and maybe Phil, you'd like to talk a little bit more about this.
I think the numbers speak for themselves. We're the world leader in liquidity management software for banks. Well over 30 banks as clients in over 50 countries, over 100 installations across 6 continents. When I grew up, there were only 5 continents, but I think North and South America maybe count as 2. So unless we've got an installation in Antarctica, which I don't think.
It's starting to show your age there. We might have in the Falkland Islands, I'm not sure.
But, I mean, we estimate 23% of multinational cross-border sweeps go through our system. So I think, as I said, the numbers speak for itself. And I don't want to dwell on it, but people should be aware.
Yeah. So This sort of set of cards is part of a large deck that we share sometimes, and it's this sort of more sophisticated capability that drives the demand.
Well, we talked
for
about
products.
having the right product. We've got to say what we mean by that.
Yes, exactly. So some of these more sophisticated pieces, half of which the coding, I have no idea how they do it, but it's quite impressive when I see it working.
Do you want to just quickly spin through some of these?
Yeah, I think we've looked at some of these things in the case study as well. How a drain pool is advantageous, how a real view of pool interest is possible, just-in-time funding. I think we went through some of these things. What is also key is probably a lot of banks don't do still today is liquidity as self-service, which is important for corporates and which is becoming increasingly required by corporates to manage their treasuries, not just in terms of managing liquidity structures, but also getting real-time visibility of the cash positions. So
well, if I self-service, I trust it'll happen, and I trust it'll happen right. If I speak to somebody about it, even leaving aside the huge cost and risk and error potential, the delay, there are just so many things that mean that it's quite frankly a no-brainer.
I think regardless of corporate segment, everybody's seeing the retail digital revolution, and they expect a trickle-down effect at least.
Well, they're all doing their own digital transformations, and many are completed. We found this when we did a session in Dubai 3 weeks ago, I think it was, and I had a panel of 4 corporate treasurers with 2 more in the audience, and every single one of them said, we've completed our digital transformation. We're still doing improvements, but we're there, and you banks need to be there too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a very good point, actually, and I think a lot of banks that I speak to are nowhere close.
That's the reality.
It's hard.
It's a big change for some of the banks. I don't know if we have a great deal of time to sort of do Q&A and to look at that. We can perhaps. I don't know if you want to just sort of wrap up.
Let me just
Phil.
Close this out by saying we showed you at the beginning how the Financial Times rates transaction banking as the fastest growing business in banking, and we believe an awful lot of that comes from profitable liquidity management. That our clients in particular are exceeding that 9% by a large margin, and on that basis, we think that the anecdotal case studies are very interesting, but bring out lessons that we try to synthesize into a few fairly simple messages, really. Mm-hmm. So on that point, I'm hoping that we've got some really interesting questions, having seen the audience list. So they may challenge you, Josh and Ravi, but Ravi, I think you've got some questions. Would you like to kick off?
There's some interesting questions. So I just want to start off with one of the themes that we actually presented. It was a slide where we showed about various feature functionality that we can provide through the solution. One interesting bit was on dynamic sequencing, and there's a question to understand that a little better.
Yeah. So dynamic sequencing. This is where the system tries to find the quickest route to move money to avoid perhaps extra transactional costs that are incurred. So let me give you an example. You may have a child account that's passing money to a parent account that's ultimately passing money up to another parent account in another geography. Well, instead of doing that, perhaps we could just go from child account to the grandparent account.
Hole in one.
Exactly, hole in one, avoiding that extra leap. Of course, the complexity of these systems is much greater than that, but that's on its most simplistic level. And the purpose really there is a reduction in transactional costs, especially if you're not just simply running on a book entry system, if you're having to use SWIFT or some other method of moving the cash around.
That seems to be a very innovative way of saying that, or a very simplistic way of saying that we've got some bit of artificial intelligence baked into the solution in terms of algorithms which can do this very efficiently.
Yes. Yes.
So it's Google Maps for liquidity management.
Absolutely.
That's right. Yeah, the shortest route to the final destination.
This route will take you longer and cost you more.
Yeah.
That's really an illustration of contextual banking, which we believe we're the leaders in, which is all about offering the best next actions and explaining the consequences of giving you choices of decisions and explaining the consequences.
Yeah.
So that's a good question.
It's a sort of a Euler's theory of how many bridges you need to, how many steps it is to cross all the bridges in the town. You know, it's,
we're getting into AI territory.
There's one more question here around, I think a lot of European customers want to understand how they can solve their true end of day zero balance problem, because that seems to be something that people understand the problem, but they really don't know how to solve it, how to provide the best possible solution to their customers.
Mm. Yeah, that's a tricky one, and it's not just Europe. It's this is a question that comes up from anybody that's got multiple core banking systems, and how do you close off one and let the other one run? I'd have to caveat anything I say by staying up front that it's case by case. You know, we have to go in, we have to understand how their end of day works on their batch. So if you have a batch end of day that you can't pause, or if you can pause it, that's great, because then you can go in.
But
do a bit of
so
surgery
you've got different strategies for different situations.
Exactly. But if you cannot pause it, then you possibly try and position the sweeping, the pooling at the very last minute before the end of day, so that you don't impact reporting. But if you can't do that and you have to run the end of day, and maybe the end of the day is finished as a 10 p.m., then of course anything that comes in subsequently, either from another geography or from same geography, has to then be catered for. And you can do that by running a mini sweep afterwards, a mini LMS afterwards, or alternatively you do a beginning of day and then back value all the entries.
Is this the famous D0?
D0 is a similar, it comes along the same lines.
That's a big topic as well.
Yeah. But it's definitely a challenge. There are very few batch processes that run in real time. Mostly they are very fixed to run at a particular time of the day in the evening, and at that point everything closes off.
So just sorry, Ravi, to be clear, the challenge is not with the liquidity management solution. The challenge is with the rest of the digital transformation going on in the bank.
Yes,
that's true, because most core banking systems are still monolithic solutions, and it's difficult to probably adapt to the new paradigm.
Correct. For instance, our liquidity management system, if you had a real-time general ledger system, we could work in real time with it, and that wouldn't be a hindrance. The trouble is that most of the general ledgers, the DDAs, the core banking systems, were written in COBOL or Voltron or something else back in 1965 or 1974. RPG, my old language. And the challenge there is how do you change that? Because that's
right. But we have examples where we've succeeded. Yes, I mean it's a challenge, but it's not to say there are not solutions.
No, there are solutions, definitely solutions. And as I say, my caveat up front was on a case-by-case basis, we go in, we understand what those challenges are and what they're really trying to achieve. Because it may not be that that a bank or a bank's clients really needs a true real-time solution, but they're looking for something that reflects a particular time cutoff.
So I guess to my earlier point, real-time visibility is probably more important. Right? The execution actually can happen a little later, but as long as the corporates can get the real-time visibility of what's going on with their cash positions, that probably can solve that as well. How are we doing for time, Phil?
I think we've got another moment or two. Do you have a quick question to finish us off with?
So I think there's one more question here which says, with all the real-time trends going on, is real-time liquidity at all possible? Is somebody doing it?
Okay, so
do we know anybody who's written a white paper on this recently?
That's a plug. Did you put that question in there?
No.
So interestingly, yeah, I wrote a white paper on real-time liquidity management, and we were trying to think a little bit sort of outside of the immediate future, the next 3 or 4 or 5 years. You know, maybe the next decade. Where do we go with real-time liquidity? What's possible? What could it mean? Hugely disruptive potentially, but would require an awful lot of partner systems to work in a particular way. My belief is...
Well, rest assured, the world has agreed to do one instant payment solution worldwide. Oh, no, it didn't. It decided to do it differently in every country. That's banking for you.
Yes. But the short answer to that is yes, there are real-time capabilities that we can deliver today. We have a system called real-time fund check, and that was part of the solution that went into the retain case study. And that enabled the corporate to visibly see everything in real time, and also to be able, therefore, the algorithm that's based there sits and looks at all the accounts and makes a go/no-go decision as to whether or not to move money around based on A, whether cash is available, and B, whether credit lines are available. So there is a lot you can do, and that we do in real time at the moment. Where it goes into the future is very much going to depend on where the whole industry wants to take it. But yes, thanks for the opportunity to plug the real-time liquidity management white paper, and we'll probably do a webinar on that in due course. So if I can persuade you, Phil, to join us.
But I guess that'll be for next time.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much to the questioners, to Josh, to Ravi for joining me. And most of all, thanks very much to yourselves as participants. If you want any more detail or want to speak to any of us, just send an email to marketing@intellectdesign.com, or go to our website, igtp.com, or as many of you know us, just drop us a line and we'll be more than happy to set up a session. That's it. Thank you very much for watching and listening, and for your great questions. We'll schedule the next webinar and let you all know.